Hello, everyone. You're welcome to today's webinar. This is the second webinar for the HR focus, and Eugene Success Dreminam from Nigeria, Global Advisory Board member of WMI. We're going to give 2 minutes for attendees to get in, and then we'll fully start the session. Okay. We're just going to give 2 minutes. You're welcome to today's webinar. Okay. We're still giving time for attendees to keep coming in, and at 2 minutes past the time, we're going to start. All right, I think we are 2 minutes in already. You're welcome to this session. My name is Eugene Success Dreminam. I'm a Global Advisory Board member from Nigeria, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second webinar for the HR Focus, which is the week 5 session for the WMI Online Academy. The first session was on Tuesday with Edna, and this session we have our presenter, Oluwatoyin Omotayo. She's from Nigeria. Oluwatoyin is a people development partner, career coach, and author with competencies and experience in business advisory, learning and organizational development, and HR generalist functions cutting across various sectors. She was up until now a leadership core faculty at the African Leadership University, Mauritius, where she taught entrepreneurial leadership, and has recently joined the business management faculty of ALU in affiliation with Glasgow Caledonian University, Scotland. And now she teaches essentials of human resource management and managing people and diversity at work. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria, and a master's degree in industrial and labor relations with a specialization in human resource management from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. She is an associate of the Chartered Institute of Personal Management of Nigeria, a member of the Human Resource Business Professional Network, USA, and is also a licensed human resource practitioner. Oluwatoyin is the founder and lead facilitator at the Velvet Learning Academy, a learning organization that trains, coaches, and mentors recent graduates and young professionals as they are equipped with 21st century skills to thrive and excel in the workplace. And we are all recent graduates or graduates, so we are really honored to have you here, Oluwatoyin. And she's very passionate about people dynamics, personal and social transformation through self-leadership, innovation, and effective policy formulation. That's quite that's quite a profile, Oluwatoyin. And here at WMI, we are all pleased to have you. We are all pleased to listen to you today, and we really hope to learn a whole lot from you.
Thank you so much, Success.
You're
if
welcome.
I knew you were going to read that, I probably would have my profile, because that was a mouthful. But thumbs up to you. You did that excellently. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you to our IT specialist, Nicole, who is behind the screen somewhere. Thank you for having me, and a huge thank you to WMI. It's always a joy for me. It's a pleasure to be here again. I was here last year, and it's just amazing to always have the opportunity to speak to young scholars across Africa. So I am delighted to be here with you once again. Thank you so much, Success.
You're welcome, Oluwatoyin. I also want to just say that we should all make this an interactive session, because Oluwatoyin is here just to listen to us, get our questions and answer them with her expertise in the human resource field. And she's been here before. This is not her first time for those that attended the last academy, and it was very interactive, and we hope to make this session way more interactive than the last one. Now, the floor is yours, Oluwatoyin. Thank you.
Thank you, Success. I'm excited to be here once again, and I'm hoping that we are going to have an amazing time for about the next 60 minutes thereabout as I share with you. So I will share my screen, and so that we can get straight into it. Please know that if you have any questions, please put it in the chat section for me. Success is going to help me to collect everything, and we're going to treat questions immediately after the session, okay? I want you to take a look back and remember the session that you had with Edna just recently, and just, call back into your memory some of the things that she has taught you about human resources, how to design a job description for specific roles. And I want you to use that same knowledge to carry through with me in today's session, because I'm just going to be building on some of the things that she has shared as regards the human resource training, okay? So today we are going to be looking at how to create a job application, what questions you should be asking, what is the length, what support and additional documents should you require. We're also going to be looking at how to strategically shortlist applicants, right? As a human resource manager or even as a line manager, how do you shortlist applicants to fill certain roles? I'm also going to be sharing on how to conduct interviews with candidates, how to make a final hiring decision, and how to create employee-employer expectations, right? That's unsaid or sometimes said expectations between employees and employer. How do we create those expectations, okay? So let's go straight into what we have for today. So creating a job application, right? You already have a role that you want to fill. You're a line manager, you have vacancies you want to put out, you have advertisements you want to make. What is a job application? So I said here that a job application form is a document that is used to gather information from job applicants during the hiring process, right? It's that form that covers essential details, right, or personal data of the candidates to help you make hiring decision. That form that you design, you already have a vacancy to fill, you have a position to fill in the organization. A job application form is what you design and then you send out either through a job board or your various means of putting out vacancies in your organizations. So that job application form that you send out, that candidates fill, so that you can get a good idea of the type of people they are, their experience, their qualifications, and if they make the right fit for the position that you're trying to fill, okay? So that's what a job application form is. Now, there are certain information that you as the hiring manager need to put on the job application form. So for the hiring manager, what are the information that you should provide on a job application form? You already have a vacancy that you want to fill, right? And you need to recruit. What are those information that you should put out? First, about the company, right? What is the name of the organization that is hiring? You put out a little about their goals and their vision, so that they can also have an idea of the organization that they are applying to, right? Nobody wants to apply to an organization that they don't know anything about, because candidates would also do their own research. So you want to tell them a little bit about the company. You state the job title, what position exactly should they be applying for. You also state the contract type. How long is the job for? Is it a permanent role? Is it a full-time role? Is it a 6-month role? Is it an internship role? You also want to be clear on that. You also want to state the job description. Edna talked about this a lot in the last session, right? So a job description, just calling back, is the details of the job that the employee is going to perform, okay? Okay, so I will not focus too much on the chat so that I can focus on this, okay? So the job description is the job details that the employee or the candidate who is coming into the organization will perform when he gets into the job or into the company. So you must also state the job description. so that you are sure that you are attracting the right candidates. You also want to state the job requirements. Now, the job requirement has to do with the skills, the competencies, the qualifications that the person who is going to apply for this job should need to so that they can have success on this job. So basically, the person who is going to perform on this job needs to have all these job requirements so that they can achieve success on this job, right? You also want to state the salary range. How much are they going to pay? Now, it is advised that instead of putting a fixed amount, sometimes you want to give room for negotiation. So it is advised that you state a salary range. So maybe you say about $20,000 to $30,000. So instead of just putting a figure to say $35,000, sometimes it can portray an organization as a strict organization, right? So you want to put a salary range, also the reporting line. This role, so for example, you are recruiting for a sales associate. A sales associate would most likely be expected to report to a sales manager. So you also want to be clear about the reporting line. Another thing is the submission method, right? Excuse me, the person who is applying for this role or the people who are applying for this role, how should they submit this job application? Is it by mail? Are they going to send CVs by mail, or they are going to apply through a job board? I'm going to show us a sample of what a job board looks like so that we have an idea of what I'm talking about. Excuse me. You also want to be specific of the application deadline, right? When you're putting out vacancies and when you're putting out advertisement, you want to give candidates the deadline by which they can apply so that they know that after this date, you are not going to take any more applications, right? And this is very important because it allows you to know what time you need to fill that role and how you need to fill that role, okay? You also want to specify when they should expect a callback, right? If you're giving them a deadline where you say you can apply for this job on or before this date, you also want to be specific to tell them if they are applying, when should they expect a callback? For some organizations, you already see the hiring process, the detailed hiring process on their website. So a candidate knows that if I send in my application today, in the next 2 weeks, I would know if I have been shortlisted or not. If I have been shortlisted in the next 4 weeks, I would know if I will be called for an interview. So sometimes organizations put that on their website. Other times you want to give a time range to say in the next 4 weeks or in the next 6 weeks, be sure that you would hear from us, right? So those are some of the information that you want to specify on the job application form, right? What are some of the gaps that you also should put in there that the candidate needs to fill? You need to provide spaces for personal details. You want to know the name of the candidate, their gender, their location. We've said a lot of times, we're in the world where we're trying to have gender balance in the workplace, trying to have equality and all of that. And so sometimes organizations do not care about the gender, but in a situation where you are actually trying to balance the gender in your, the gender graphic in your organization. So for example, you already have a lot of males and you're trying to balance the gender statistics. It might be okay for you to specify who you're looking for, right? In terms of gender, you also want to specify, you want to give them a gap where they fill their location. Some roles cannot take in candidates who don't reside in the country where that role is being advertised. So imagine you have a role in Kenya and someone from Nigeria is applying. You already know as the hiring manager that you are not able to accommodate someone from another location, especially if it's a physical, if the job requires a physical presence. So you want people to specify. You want to request for their CV and their cover letter. You also want to give them a space to provide references. And this can either be requested for at the point of asking for applications, or you can tell them that when they are shortlisted, or if they are shortlisted, they should expect you to ask for references. Okay, so it can either be at the beginning of the hiring process or in the middle of the hiring process. You also want to ask for their employment history. And this is because so many times as human resource managers, one of the big challenges that we have in hiring people is that you find candidates applying for jobs that they do not qualify for. And as a hiring manager, it can be really frustrating, right? Where people are sending in their CVs for the jobs that they obviously do not qualify for. And so what asking for the employment history does for you is that you can pull a track line, right? Or a track record. So for example, someone is applying for a production manager, right? And you look through their employment history and there is nothing that looks like a production manager role. It just tells you that maybe this candidate is not really qualified for this job. And so it reduces the stress that you have to go through when you get to the shortlisting stage. And so it's important that you ask for their employment history. At least you want the candidates to detail 2 of their most recent employment placements, okay? You also want to ask for their educational and professional qualifications. Now, this is dependent on the role that you're applying for. I've seen some organizations say, we don't care what you study in school, as long as you can get the job done. But I've also seen some organizations say, this role we're recruiting for is a specialized role, and so we need specialized skills, right? And so you want to request for professional qualifications. Another thing that you want to do is to ask scenario-based questions. So for example, you can ask a candidate at the point of application to say, if you were in this situation, what would you do, right? I'm going to show you an example and I'm going to give you how the application form looks like in both cases, where you're just asking for personal details and when you're asking scenario-based questions. You also want to ask the employee to state the reason for applying, right? And you know, the reason why we do this is because when you ask open-ended questions, right? Open-ended questions are questions that you can't give a yes or no answer. You have to be more detailed in your response. While closed-ended questions are yes or no questions, right? So when you ask open-ended questions in the hiring process, it allows you to get and understand the state of mind of a candidate, right? It's hard for people, you know, to fake it, especially when they're answering open-ended questions. So when you ask situational-based questions, you can tell the state of mind of a candidate or how they would react on the job when they're asked to answer some certain questions, right? And we're going to see all of that as I'm going to show you very soon. Also, you want to state, you want to ask them, when are they available to start, right? There are some candidates that are so qualified and you know that you can give them some time to close out from their previous workplace before they join you. So you also want to ask them, when are they available to start? Is it immediately? Is it in 2 weeks' time? Is it in 4 weeks' time? How much notice do they have to give at their previous place of employment, okay? Now, this is a sample of a job application form, and this is quite straightforward. So you can see here on the screen, okay, so you can see here on the screen, you have the personal information spaces where the candidate fills the name, the address, the phone number. This is also an important question where you ask them, are they legally eligible to work in the country where the role is being advertised? This saves you a lot of time, a lot of stress, especially if you're not willing to receive candidates from outside the location of the job, okay? You ask them the position they're applying for, their available start date, the desired pay. This is also a space for them to fill in their education. So you can see school name, location, years attended, degree received, what did they major in. Here you also have a space for references and you want to specify. You can see here business and professional only. So organizations would ask you that your references must fit a particular specification. So they probably have to be business people or professionals only, right? If you look to my right here, you can see the spaces for employment history. So usually organizations would ask you to state maybe your 2 most recent employment placements. So these are questions that you need to ask candidates at the point of hiring, okay? Now, let me show you an example of a job board. So that's a job application form. Now, sometimes you could also want to use a job board to advertise a role that you're trying to fill. This is an application. This is a call for candidates that has been put out by Paystack. I want to believe, if you don't know Paystack, please check on online about Paystack. So they're trying to recruit for a fraud analyst. Now you can see here, what they have done in the first few paragraphs is to state a bit about their organization. Remember, employees are attracted, or candidates rather, are attracted to your organization because of some of the things that they know about you or that you have portrayed yourself. So they've said Paystack helps businesses in Africa get paid by anyone from anywhere in the world. And so if you feel like you want to be part of that vision aligns with your own personal vision, this is the part where you sell yourself as an organization or as an hiring manager to the candidates, right? So you talk a bit about the organization, then you go to the role, about the fraud analyst role. So you have here, if you read through, you are going to see all the things that the role is about, right? We'll trust you to hear is the job description. So sometimes organizations, especially organizations who are wanting to attract millennials or young people, like we all are on this call, they'll use fancy words. So instead of saying job description, they've said, we'll trust you to monitor real-time transaction queues, this and that. So this is the job description. Now, this is the job requirement. The difference between a job description and a job requirement is that a job description states what you will be doing on the job. A job requirement states all that you need to have to succeed on the job. So this here is a job requirement where they say you thrive as Paystack's fraud analyst role if you see things like academic qualifications, professional qualifications, if you have over 2 years experience as a fraud analyst, if you are proficient in SQL, advanced Excel. So if you're putting out your vacancy on a job board, these are the things that you want your candidates to see when they're applying. Now, you can go further to now ask for their personal details, right? You want them to fill in their first name, their last name, their email address, their resumes, their cover letters. Now, here is an example of what I mean by a scenario-based question, right? I said earlier on that this gives you a good idea of the state of mind of a candidate. How would they behave when they are employed? How would they behave in certain positions and in certain situations? For example, Paystack has asked a question to say, one of Paystack's 6 core values is pursue growth and learning, which reminds us to strive to get a little better at something every day. Share with us an example of a skill you picked up recently. What was that skill and why did you decide to learn it? And so this requires that you tell them a skill that you have picked up recently, and they can easily detect how you would perform on the job based on the responses that a candidate gives, right? They are also asking here, what aspect of fraud monitoring and analysis do you think is often overlooked or undervalued? Please explain in detail why you believe so. So these are some questions. These are called scenario-based questions that you as an hiring manager should ask candidates so that you can understand how they would perform in certain situations. Okay. So you have all the scenario-based questions. Ensure that you are asking questions that directly connect to the position that they're applying for. Okay, so you don't want to be asking things of what's your best food, right? What's your best color? Sometimes those are not necessary questions, but you want to ask them questions that will make them think. Questions like, why are you applying to this role? How do you think you're going to bring value to this organization? And that will help you to determine if this candidate should be moved to the next stage or not. Okay, let me know in the chat section. So I'm going to do a brief pause. Let me know in the chat section if you are with me, if you're understanding some of the things that I've shared. I can see the chat, so just let me know in the chat section. Let me know you're with me. Okay. If you can hear me, please do let me know that you're with me. Okay, Abdul. Okay, so Abdul is with me, Kom is with me. Great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on very quickly. So now that you have received a lot of application, now bear in mind, I said earlier that one of the frustrations, right, or the challenges that hiring managers face is the fact that you would always find people applying for jobs that they don't even qualify for, right? Because it's the popular belief that you have more people who are looking for jobs than the available jobs itself. So you are going to find all sorts of applications. People are going to apply for roles that do not qualify for. You can't control that. But here is how you can control it at the shortlisting stage. And what is shortlisting? It's the process of identifying the candidates from your applicant pool who best meets the required criteria and you're willing to move forward with in the application process, right? So the shortlisting stage is where you now start to see who doesn't qualify, who can we interview, who qualifies, who moves on to the next stage. Now, it's interesting to know that Ideal has done this research and they've discovered that 52% of talent acquisition leaders say the most difficult part of their job is shortlisting the right candidates from a large applicant pool. And, these are the things that we would see as hiring managers. For example, I used to be in an organization where we did a lot of graduate recruitment for several organizations. And the moment you open up an application in a day, say about 9 a.m., by 2 p.m., you could have about 1,000 applicants. Now imagine that you're trying to recruit just 10 people and you have 1,000 applicants. You can imagine how Herculean that must be for the hiring manager. And so shortlisting is a critical process that you must go through in the whole hiring process, okay? So what are some of the things that you should take note of when you're shortlisting? Number one, you want to determine your shortlist criteria. Depending on the role that you are trying to fill, what is your shortlist criteria? Is it education, work experience, skills and knowledge, personality traits, competencies? These are some things that might be a shortlist criteria for you. For some organizations, they don't care about your education or how many years experience you have. They just want you to come on board. But depending on the role that you're trying to fill, if you're trying to fill a specialized role or a senior management role, then you want to be concerned about the work experience, the skills and knowledge, the competencies that the candidate is bringing to the organization, okay? And there are also two major ways to determine your shortlist criteria. You have the essential criteria and you have the desirable criteria. Now, the essential criteria are the must-haves that a candidate must possess before they can be considered shortlisted for the role. For example, ability to work in a country where company is located is an example of an essential criteria. So if I'm trying to fill a role for a customer rep in Lagos, Nigeria, and I want he or she to be present in the office physically, I will not be able to consider candidates from Ghana or from Kenya because I need physical presence in Lagos, Nigeria. But sometimes you will find people from other countries applying, right? And so shortlist is important. So these are must-haves. Then you have the desirable criteria, which is the nice to haves. They are not compulsory, but it's okay to have them. For example, professional certification. Some organizations will say a professional certification is an added advantage, but it's not a deal breaker, which means that whether you have it or not, we would still consider you, but it would be nice for you to have it. So it's a nice to have. So you determine what is an essential criteria for you and what is a desirable criteria for you, okay? Then you move on to the second thing, which is to create a shortlist scorecard. Now, this helps you to erase all forms of biases. It helps you to see exactly the people or the candidates who best fits the role that you are trying to advertise for. So what you want to do is to take the essential and desirable criteria you've identified above and create a shortlist scorecard for your candidates. Now, the purpose of this scorecard is it allows you to assign rating for each screen candidate. Now, take a look at the right hand of my screen. If you can see my screen, here you have the candidate name, the education level, the retail experience. So this is a scorecard for hiring a retail associate, right? You have all of these criteria. So the hiring manager for this organization has decided that these are essential and desirable criteria that the candidate must have. So for example, if you look at the first name, you have Connor Taylor. Now, you have education level, retail experience, customer service experience, communication skills, and the final thing, whether the person is fit or unfit for the job. In educational level, the hiring manager has identified 2 to be the highest mark. It means that for an employee or for a candidate to be considered fit for this job, you must have 2 as the highest, okay? So you have a minimum of 1, a maximum of 2. You have that across the board. In retail experience, a maximum of 2. In customer service experience, a maximum of 3. In communication skills, a maximum of 3. Now, take a look at Connor Taylor, and this, I want you to pay attention to this. For education level, he's had 1/2. For retail experience, he's had 1/2. For customer service, he's had 2/3. For communication skills, he's had 3/3. So for communication skills, Connor Taylor happens to be the strongest candidate. But can you still see that he has been considered unfit for the job? And here is why. This tells you that the hiring manager has identified education level and retail experience as their essential criteria. So even though he has scored highest in the communication skills, he has still not been considered fit for the job. And so when you add all of this together, this gives you about 2 + 2, 4 + 3, 7. So he has 7, right? Where other people have maximum mark of 2 in educational level, retail experience, customer service, and even though they seem to have poor communication skills, the hiring manager has considered them fit for the job. Does it mean that communication skill is not a necessary skill for a candidate to have? No, it doesn't mean that. But the hiring manager has somehow, I want to believe, figured that if I'm able to get someone who has educational level and retail experience intact, I can train them on communication skills. Do we understand, how this works? So sometimes you might look at a candidate and say, okay, if you have this, or rather you have this, so I can train you on the ones that you don't have, right? So these are some things that you need to look out for. And this would really help you to assign ratings. It helps you to eliminate bias, and then you know who is fit to move on to the next stage, which is the interview stage, or who you are going to have to cut ties with, okay? Now, let's move on to the third thing. After you have done, you have used the shortlist scorecard, you want to determine the number of candidates you are able to shortlist and interview. In a situation where you have 1,000 applicants and you want to fill 10 roles, you know that you cannot interview 500 candidates. It's the most impossible thing ever. So sometimes you don't have the resources or the capacity to interview all of those people. So maybe you're looking for 10 candidates. You want to decide that, okay, I'm going to be able to interview 20 people if I'm trying to get 10 finalists, right? So determine how many candidates that you have to shortlist to get a successful hire. How many people do you have the capacity and the resources to interview, right? For high volume recruitment roles, so maybe a large organization looking to hire a customer service representative, you might open a large pool of applicants and say, you know what, everybody come. It's a customer service role. We need as many people as we can get. But in terms of specialized roles, you might not have the capacity or the resources to interview a large number. So you want to make sure that you have done a lot in the first stage, which is the first initial stage of shortlisting. Make sure that you have received enough CVs, enough cover letters, and you have the people who would move on to the interview stage, okay? Now, here are some of the additional ways to shortlist applicants. You can also use pre-hire assessment, right? In terms of verbal and quantitative reasoning, logic test, personality test. You can also use shortlisting softwares. There's a shortlisting software that is called the ATS, which is a short form of applicant tracking system. There's also Zoho Recruit. These are softwares that automatically help you sieve candidates who do not qualify or who do not match the criteria that you have set. Now, there are some positives and negatives with these softwares, and it's the fact that they can move candidates who are not actually best suited for the role. They can move them into the shortlist stage. And what happens is the ATS is a software that works by using keywords. So as the hiring manager, you have already imputed some keywords to look out for, that the ATS is supposed to look out for in the hiring process, right? So what the ATS does is it looks out for those keywords, and the moment the ATS does not catch that keyword, it can actually drop the candidate CV into the trash. And now the problem with this is, if you have a candidate who has manipulated their CVs or who has lied on the CV, the ATS doesn't recognize a lie. So the ATS picks that candidate as a qualified candidate, whereas the candidate has manipulated his CV. But if you have someone who is very qualified, but who has not used certain keywords, the ATS doesn't recognize it. So sometimes it can make the mistake of picking those who are not qualified and leaving out those who are actually qualified. Okay? Okay. So you have the false positive and you have the false negatives. And so sometimes you have to be careful when you're using this shortlisting softwares. Another thing you want to do as the hiring manager is to consider special recommendations, especially or particularly if you are hiring for a senior role, maybe like a CEO role or a senior manager role. You can put out recommendations because at that point, you need someone with quite a number of experience. You don't want to hire someone with 2 years experience for the role of a CEO. So you might ask other hiring managers in the same industry, or you might ask other colleagues if they can recommend to you applicants or candidates who can come in for interviews, okay? So now here is one thing that hiring managers usually forget, right? And I want you to remember this so that you don't forget it. You want to ensure that you have sent a shortlist mail to the successful candidates. So if the candidates are already successful, if you're going to move them to the interview process, make sure you send to them. Now that might be easy to do, right? But another thing that you should remember is to send also regret mails to unsuccessful candidates. As an hiring manager who is representing an organization, you also want to keep your employer brand intact. And so you don't want candidates saying, I applied for that job 2 months ago and I never heard back from them. And this is something that we're trying to correct in the recruitment space. We want everybody to know if they've qualified or if they've not qualified. I know that it can be Herculean, especially when you have a large number of candidates, but you have softwares that can help you to do that. All you need to do is to make a copy of all the emails, put them into a software, and then send a bulk mail to those who are not successful. That way, a candidate feels at rest that, okay, at least I know that I have heard back from them. I didn't make it, so I can look elsewhere. So you don't want to keep a candidate just waiting and not, having to guess, did they qualify, were they shortlisted or not? Sometimes it doesn't speak good about the organization, and it doesn't also make the candidates feel better. Okay, now let's move to conducting interviews. You have shortlisted, you have decided on those that are going to continue to the interview stage. How do we conduct interviews? Here are some tips for you to remember when you're preparing for interviews, and I call them the pre-interview preparation. You want to prepare the interview location or the platform. So if you're going to be having physical interviews, you want to ensure that everyone in the organization, particularly the front desk officer or the key stakeholders in this recruitment process, they are aware that you are going to be having candidates for interviews, right? Remember, as much as you are interviewing candidates, candidates are also interviewing you. So there's something we call the employer brand, right? Or you want candidates to have a good experience. You want to give them a good candidate experience. You want them to, even if they don't get the job, you want them to still be able to recommend you to their peers or their colleagues or their friends. So you want to have a good reputation all through the process. So prepare the interview location. If you're going to be hiring virtually, or if you're going to be having a virtual interview, make sure the Zoom link has been sent way before the interview date. If they have to download a Zoom link or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet, make sure you inform them before and the platform that you are going to use, so that they can also familiarize with these virtual platforms, right? You also want to ensure that the interview questions have been prepared and every member of the panel is up to date. You don't want a situation where people are just thinking about the questions to ask at the point of interview. It can throw the candidates off balance. And remember, I said that as much as you are interviewing a candidate, the candidates are also interviewing you. And why is this important? You don't want to get to the final stage where you have to make an offer to the star candidate, the one who has impressed you the most, and they reject your offer. I've experienced that. I've seen that so many times, where you found the best candidate, you're so excited, you're so happy to have them on board, and you make them an offer and they reject it. And sometimes the simple reason could be, I had such a bad candidate experience, right? It's sad to lose a talent, trust me. So you want to ensure that as much as they are prepared, you're also prepared to have them around. Make them feel comfortable. Don't intimidate them, don't coerce them, except if you're trying to hire for the US military, right? Or the Navy, or the armed forces, or the Navy. You want to make your candidates feel very comfortable. You might crack a bit of a respectful joke, or ask them how they're doing, if they're okay to be here, and all of those things. Just make them feel comfortable, be respectful, be courteous, smile as well. Another thing you want to do is to reiterate the interview duration, right? How long is the interview going to be for? This you should have also included in the interview invite when you sent them a mail. But at the same time, you also want to let them know that within the space of 9 to 12, we will be here, so they can prepare their minds. And if they have any other schedule, they can cancel it ahead of time, right? So you want to tell them how long they'll be here, and ensure that you don't keep candidates waiting for so long at the interview location, right? On the interview call. Give them a specific time and ensure that the interview is concluded at the time that you have specified from the beginning, okay? Now, there are different types of interviews. So you have the individual interviews, and you can either have a candidate to one interviewer, or you can have one candidate to multiple interviewers. So on the left side of my screen, on your screen as well, this is an example of the one candidate to multiple interviewers, or panel interviewers, like we call them. You could also have one candidate to one interviewer, which is what you see in the second box. And you could also have multiple candidates to multiple interviewers. For example, if you're recruiting for maybe a graduate training program where you have a lot of candidates to interview, the group interview is usually the best form of interview, so that you get to skip processes on time. And then you can pick maybe about 2-3 people and then take them to the final round of the interview stage. So you could go for whichever interview type that you feel comfortable with, that you know that you are going to be able to get the best candidate from. Remember, interview could also be structured or unstructured. So sometimes, especially if you're hiring for senior positions, you maybe, because you want them to feel more comfortable, you can say, let's meet for a cup of coffee, maybe during break, to just have an initial chat with the candidate as well. So interviews can go a lot of ways, but make sure that you are picking the way that best works for you and the organization. Okay. Now, what are some interview elements that we should take a look at? You have the competency-based assessments. Now, this is used to test the competency of the candidates. And I'm going to show you an example of a competency-based assessment question in the next slide. Another thing is you could ask technical or behavioral questions, which are also called scenario-based questions, like we talked about earlier. So if you're hiring for a human resource manager, a good scenario-based question would be, tell us a time where you have resolved conflict in the workplace, or tell us a time where you had to manage a conflict between a client and the CEO. These are examples of scenario-based questions. So the candidate can't say yes or no. They have to express themselves. You will understand their state of mind. You understand how they will solve problems when they come into the organization. You understand the kind of employee that they would be if you eventually have to hire them, okay? Another thing is the panel should be made up of the HR manager, the line manager of the role you're trying to hire for. Now, this is very important because as the HR manager, you might know little or nothing about an engineering department. So for example, you're trying to hire an engineer. As hiring managers, we know little or nothing about engineering. And so it's important that you have the line manager or someone from that department to sit on the interview panel, because they are also able to detect if the candidate is on the right track of answering the questions or if they don't fit for the role, okay? Another thing you need to do is to give candidates room to ask questions at the end of the interview, right? This portrays you as an organization that is open and also willing to listen. So you let candidates ask their questions. If they have any questions, you give them the opportunity to ask at the end of the interview, and you also appreciate them for coming. Remember, as hiring managers, we are not doing candidates a favor. We are also looking for the best or the most suitable candidates to fill that role. So we're interviewing them. They are also looking at hiring managers and organizations. They're trying to determine if this is the best organization for them to work with. So you must also remember that at every point in time, okay? Now, here's an example of a competency-based assessment. So here you have leadership skills. So for example, you want to test a candidate's leadership skills. These are examples of questions to have. How would you describe your leadership style? How would you manage an instance of violation of code of ethics? How will you manage a low performing resource, right? So for example, if the candidate says, when I see a low performing talent, I just need to fire them immediately. I can't stand it. That tells you that maybe this is not the best candidate, because firing is not the solution to managing a low performing employee. You want to put them on maybe a performance program. You want to ask them questions because you don't know what the candidate, you don't know what the employee is going through. And so when you hear statements like, I'm just going to fire them, you want to pause a bit on that candidate. But when you start to hear things like, I'm going to create a performance development plan, I'm going to have a one-on-one session with them, ask them how they're feeling, is everything okay at home? This tells you that, okay, this might be a good fit for this role, right? Because human resource managers are not, we just don't do hiring and firing. I know that popular belief is that human resource managers are very good at hiring people and firing people. Absolutely not. If you've ever heard that, I apologize on behalf of all the human resource managers. We just don't hire and fire. We are also particular about helping people to develop their skills, to develop their potentials, and make sure they're doing what they enjoy doing and what they are strong in doing, okay? So you have leadership skills, communication skills, integrity and work ethics. So these are questions that are called competency-based questions. It helps you to determine the skill, the knowledge, and the attitude of the candidates that you're interviewing, okay? Now, let's move on to some other tips for effective interviews. As a hiring manager, you want to ensure that you've identified your own biases. Now, this is very common, with some hiring managers where, because of your own personal biases, your own stereotypes, and all these other biases like the recency effect, it can cloud your judgment when you are at the interview stage. So you want to make sure that you've identified your own biases and you ensure that your biases are not clouding your judgment in picking the best candidate. So for example,
Iggy,
okay.
Take that. No, but my.
Okay. So sorry for that interruption. So for example, an example of a bias would be a recency effect. A recency effect is the fact that you have just interviewed a candidate who has performed excellently. And so the next candidate comes, and because of that recent candidate, you feel like nobody better can come after this candidate. That's an example of a recency reflect bias. You are already biased by the previous candidates you saw, that you are not interested in listening to what the other candidates have to say. Okay? So these are some biases that you should take note of and to ensure that they're not clouding your judgment. You also want to learn to discard the noise, irrelevant information. There are some things that as hiring managers, we pay less attention to, right? So for example, dressing may matter for sales executives, right? Because they're customer facing. But for a technical guy or someone who works in the IT department, you're not so much concerned whether they put on jeans or they put on ties or they have blazers on. So depending on the role that you're trying to apply for, you also want to look at the relevant information. If the information is not relevant, then don't focus on it. Also, you need to take your time in decision making. Wait till all the candidates have been interviewed before making your final decision, right? Focus on job-related characteristics and ask questions that align. I mentioned earlier, questions like, what is your best food? What's your best color? They are irrelevant information. Nobody really cares about a candidate's best food or best color. Ask them questions that are directly connected to the job, like those scenario-based questions we have talked about, right? Also, resist hiring in your own image. And a lot of hiring managers, we fall into this trap. We want to hire people who look like us, who speak like us, who dress like us. You have to be very careful, right? Because the fact that someone can dress like you does not mean that they can do the job you want them to do. So you want to be very careful, in hiring people who just look like you. And because we're in an age where we're trying to promote diversity and inclusion, you want to be in an organization where we have such diverse teams. I'm privileged to work in an organization where we have not less than 20 African countries and even non-African countries. It's a good feeling when you have diverse people on your team who bring diverse ideas, diverse perspectives to the team. It's brilliant, right? We get to achieve our goals faster and better. Okay, so you want to be careful of, just building homogeneous teams across the organization, okay? Now, what do you need to consider when you're trying to make a final hiring decision? So you have shortlisted, you have interviewed. What are the things you should consider? First, you want to go back to your scorecards, right? And note the criteria that you have specified as essential criteria. Those are the things that you want to pay attention to. Also, remember to collate feedback and panels assessments. The reason why you have multiple people on the interview panel is so that you can have multiple opinions, multiple results, right? So that you are not the only one making the decision. So the panel's feedback is also a good way to determine who the best candidate is. If 5 people on the panel agree to one candidate and they say that candidate is the best, then your job is done. Then you already know that that candidate is the best candidate, right? You also request for references at this point. That a candidate is good at a job also means that you should make sure you are doing a background check, right? We've seen stories of candidates who it was due to a bad behavior at their former company, even though they are good at their job, but that doesn't mean behavior-wise they are good people. So you want to request for references, verify and confirm that the candidate's information is accurate. Another thing that you get to do at this point is to have a final interview with the manager. So you can have one interview and then you can also have another final interview where you just dot the I's, cross the T's, just to be double sure that you are making the right decision. And because the manager of the role is the one who directly oversees the performance of this new employee, you want to ensure that there's also alignment between the manager and the new candidates that is coming into the organization, okay? After which you can now go ahead to prepare the contract details, the job description, the location to resume, the time, the salary, and other benefits, after which you will present an offer to the candidate, okay? I believe that we are following, and I'm looking forward to your questions after the session. Now that you have made an offer to the candidate, the candidate has accepted your offer, they are excited to come on board, you are excited to have them. What are the ways in which you can create employee-employer expectation, right? So you go on to, you have designed a contract of employment, right? You have the written contract. Now, a contract of employment can go in two forms. We have the written contract, which is the offer of employment, your name, your salary, the location that the candidate is going to be resuming at, and all the basic information. Now, a psychological contract is usually an unwritten contract or an unwritten expectation between employees and the organization. So for example, trust is an example of a psychological contract, right? A benefit of doubt, understanding is an example of a psychological contract. So beyond what you have stated in the written contract, the psychological contract also exists whereby the employer has some expectations of the employee based on trust, integrity, just good behavior, good rapport, and also the employee has certain psychological expectations from the employer. And we'll see this in the different duties of employee to employer and employer to employee. So the employer has duty to pay wages and salaries. The employer has duties to provide work, to ensure safety of employee at work. Now, some of the times, these are not usually stated on the contract. But for example, if an employee is working in an office that is not conducive, it might not be written on the contract, but this is an example of a psychological contract because the employee expects that the employer is going to provide a conducive office for me to work in. The air conditions are going to be available, the funds are going to be available. So even though it's not written, you as an employer have the duty to provide a safe work environment for your employee. Also, the employee has duty to obey restrictions, duty to use skill and expertise, duty to act in good faith, right? Sometimes you want the employee to have, to give the employer a benefit of doubt. For example, you are asking for something and it's not being provided to you. Maybe you want to sometimes make excuses for the employer to say, okay, maybe the organization is going through a tough time. Maybe I can understand what they are going through, and just have that conversation with the employer. Okay, the employee also has a duty to not misuse employer's confidential information. So these are some of the things that are communicated either verbally or by written form between employers and employee at the point of hiring. Now, when the employees or the new candidates, when they come on board, the first thing that you should usually do in the organization is the induction and orientation process, right? And this is the process where you welcome new employees to the organization and prepare them for their role. Some organizations usually do a 3-day training where you are just really teaching them about the vision, the mission, the goals, the values of the organization, introducing them to co-workers, introducing them to colleagues, showing them their workspaces, what the culture is, what is expected of them in the workplace. You're also helping them to familiarize with company policies, company rules, and basically what the organizational culture is, so that they are aware of some of the things that obtain in the organization. Okay, I get to round up very soon. Now remember that the hiring process is a holistic process. Every process is connected from the point where you decide that a position needs to be filled to the point of actually filling the position. It's all a connected process. And so as HR managers or as hiring managers, you must pay close attention to your requirements. And the reason why we say set requirements before you start is so that you are not confused or you are not affected by biases during the hiring process. So you have to stay through to the criteria that you have identified from the beginning of the hiring process. And so you must pay real close attention to ensure that candidates align with the set requirements. And sometimes as hiring managers, we are caught up in the fear of, what if I make the wrong decision? Am I sure this is the right candidate? And here's what I always like to say. Don't overthink it. If you have done the needful through the hiring process, you'll be sure that you have made the right choice of a final candidate, if you have, aligned the candidates with the earlier set requirements, just be sure that you have the right candidates and they are going to perform excellently on the job. Okay. At this point, I have come to the end of my presentation. I will now hand over to Success if there are other questions, and I would also take a look at the chat section. Success, I can
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oluwatoyin. Honestly, this session has been mind-blowing, and as you can see in the chat, everyone is saying it's mind-blowing, they're getting a lot. I think we only have so far 2 questions. I can see Yusta hands raised up, but I would like him to put his question in the chat box or in the Q&A box so that we can get it from there. First question is from Alpha Fokoro. She said, what do we actually look into a candidate during an interview?
What do we actually look into a candidate during an interview? Thank you, Alpha, for that question. So like I said earlier, you already have set requirements. You already have set criteria, right? So some of the things that you're looking out for in a candidate are the criteria that you have set. For example, you are trying to hire a human resource manager. Some of the things you're looking out for is their experience in terms of human resource management. Have they ever practiced human resource? Remember, it's a managerial role. And that's why I said human resource manager. So you're looking for their educational qualifications. Have they ever at any point, taken a course in human resources? Do they have maybe professional certifications in human resources? You're also looking for composure, right? So depending on the role that you're looking for, you have different criteria. You want to employ a human resource manager who is composed, right? Who can be patient sometimes, who is not easily flustered, because a human resource manager deals with different kinds of employees in the workplace. So you don't want a human resource manager who flips at every little thing that is being said to them. You want a patient, a calm, and patience doesn't mean dull. No, you just want someone who understands maybe certain policies. And that's why the scenario-based question is very, very good. So what you want to do is to do your research as a hiring manager and then look at some of the things that allows a candidate to be successful at a job. Those are the things that you will look out for in the interview process. I hope I've been able to answer that question to the best.
All right, thank you so much, Oluwatoyin. I think you answered that very well. We have a second question from Alexander from Ghana. He said, sometimes salary expectation is asked during interview or application stage. In such case, do you expect the applicant to answer the question? And if you expect the applicant to answer the question, what is the idea behind such question asked? I also have the same question. Why ask? What's the idea behind that?
Very, very good question. I kind of knew that this question was going to come up at some point, right? Okay, let me answer because I am also an hiring manager, and I believe that at some point I must have fallen into the trap of these things, right? But ethically, it is not right, and I stand to be corrected, but it's not ethical for a hiring manager to ask you for your previous salary. So what you want to do if you are asked is to say something like, I would choose not to, or I would rather not disclose my previous salary. But ethically, it's not right. But people say they're trying to use it to benchmark. But here's what I like to say, and I want to believe that I'm talking to maybe some hiring managers or future hiring managers. The culture that we want to see should start from us. If it is something that has obtained in the past, doesn't make it right. So henceforth, can we come to an agreement that we would ask candidates the right questions and we will not ask them unethical questions? You already have a salary range, you already have a benchmark, and that is what you should be trying to offer them. So you really don't need to know what a candidate was earning in their previous position. If the candidate meets the requirements, you already have the salary range, then offer the candidate what he or she deserves to earn. So Alexander, I might not be able to answer, the idea behind some questions, because like I said, it's not exactly ethical, right? But some people sometimes want to use it to determine how much they would pay you. But I don't agree to that strategy. I believe that any candidate should be paid what they are worth, as regards to the role that they are applying for. So what you were earning in your previous role should have nothing to do with your new salary. That's my perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Oluwatoyin. I'm sure that's true. And as a future hiring manager, I gladly would adhere to that. Next question is from Alpha again. She's asking, do we also have to check for the candidates for validation of their skill with their previous employer?
Very interesting question. So it might not be exactly right to go to their previous employer to ask for the validation of their skill. But here is why we like to ask certain questions. And if you're hiring for a role that is very skill-based, what you want to do is to infuse practical assessment as part of the hiring process, right? You might not be able to go back because different things happen with previous employers and employees, right? So you don't want the previous employer to, manipulate the hiring process. So if you're hiring for a position that is very skill-based, you want to infuse practicals. For example, you want to hire a tech person, right? You want to hire someone who develops software or someone who can code. It just makes sense that in a hiring process, you must give them a practical test of building a code for you. You should do that, right? You want to hire, what's the word now? Someone who maybe a sales manager or a sales associate. You must infuse practical assessment of them giving you a time or an experience where they have sold the product, how they increase profit for the product. So when the role is skill-based, make sure that you are infusing practical assessment into the hiring process. It would help you to get a validation of their skill instead of asking from their previous employers. And you always know the true color when people perform a practical test. They either fail or they pass. So I believe that's enough for you to determine their skill level.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Oluwatoyin. Thank you for that question, Alpha. We have a question in the chat from Molly Grace, and she's asking, in a case when you know the applicant, the candidate, him or her, trying to mimic the question in the chat.
Okay, so it says, as a hiring manager, would you want to show the candidates that you actually know them and that other panelists should know that you actually know the candidates? Interesting question. It might not be the wisest thing to do, in all honesty, because you don't want to interfere with that candidate's chance of getting the job, right? And there are a lot of biases that can happen during the hiring process. And that's why I said that as an hiring manager, be aware of your own biases and make sure that you cut out your biases during the hiring process. Because if you allow other people on the panel to know that you know this candidate, it could either reduce or increase the candidate's chance. So you don't want them to make a decision just because you know this person and they want to please you. At the same time, you don't want them to make a decision just because you know this person and they don't want it to feel like they are being sentimental. So you want to give everyone equal playing ground. When the candidate comes in fact, you should let the candidate know before they step in that it's between you and the panel. I assume that you don't know me in the sense that you are going to be subjected to the same process that every other person was subject to. So you don't have to create any familiarity at that point. Allow people to make their decisions. You can gist and familiarize after, But at that point, it's serious business. So it might not be a wise thing to do, to let everybody know that you know this candidate.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We have the next question from Esquan Marketing Agency. Okay, he's saying if a candidate was earning more with their previous as a new employer, am I to pay more than they used to take? And he's also leaving a side note if he can employ you as his HR director. So that's the question. If a candidate was earning more with their previous as a new employer, am I to pay more than they used to take?
Interesting question. Thank you, Esquan. If a candidate was earning more with their previous as a new employer, am I to pay more than they used to take? It's an interesting question. And here's what I would like to say, that please pay the candidate what they deserve, irrespective of whether they were earning more or they were earning less. The salary that you have apportioned to the role that you are hiring them for, as long as they match all the criteria, please, by all means, do right by them and pay them what they are worth and what the role itself is worth. Not just what they are worth, but what the role is worth, right? I've seen organizations that pay human resource managers maybe in Naira, 100,000 Naira or 150,000 Naira, right? It might look like good money, but I also see some organizations who pay as high as $1 million Naira, right, for HR manager positions, depending on what your salary band is. Different organizations have different salary band. So pay the employee what the role is worth, depending on the job that they will do. So please, let's not focus so much on what their previous employer was paying them, because organizations have different capacity. You have startup organizations who don't have so much at the moment, but you know that as a company, you can afford it. So do right by your employees, because also remember that different things motivate employees. And sometimes employees are motivated by money, and that's actually the truth. Some people are working, sweating daily because of the goodwill, because of how much you're paying them. And so if you want good job, excellent work from your employees, please pay them what they're worth. You are going to enjoy, their service on the long run. Yeah.
Thank you. And that was from Desmond, and I'm sure Oluwatoyin really answered it. So I think there's another question in the Q&A box, and I'm going to read from Alpha again. She's asking from the candidate's point of view, would it be rude or unprofessional to say that we have checked the interviewee profile in the LinkedIn or social media platform?
Very interesting. From the candidate point of view, would it be rude or unprofessional to say we have checked the interview profile in LinkedIn or other social media platform? Maybe the word is not rude, but you don't have to. Okay, if you're asking from the candidate point of view, I believe you mean interviewer, right? The person who is going to be interviewing you. Let me know if that's what, because if you're asking from candidate point of view, so you're asking that, would it be rude or unprofessional to say that you have checked the interviewer's LinkedIn or social media platform? For LinkedIn, it's not unprofessional to check. In fact, these days, especially because we have migrated to this remote form of working, interviews happen online. I know people who are working with organizations that they have never met physically, right? So we're now in that remote. It's not unprofessional to check their platform. But the question is, what are you looking to achieve by telling them that you have checked on them? Especially if it's a place like LinkedIn, where if you check someone's profile, you get a notification that someone has checked your profile, right? So there's really nothing to hide. So it's okay if you check, the interviewer or the interviewee, just to, familiarize. It's also a good place for you to check their track record, but you don't have to say it because they will see it anyway that you have checked their profile. So I don't think it's rude or unprofessional. I think it's acceptable. Yeah. Interviewer. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. We're still having questions. This is from Alexander again. He's asking, please, could it be that an applicant is not having much much concerning his or her employment history, but could be a perfect candidate to be considered for the job over a candidate who has a lot of past experiences or employment history. Sometimes some candidates just complete their education and they don't have much of the employment history, and they stand to compete with.
Okay, very interesting question. It might actually be dicey to employ someone who doesn't have so much unemployment history over someone who has much more on their employment history, because again, we assume or we expect that you've gained more experience because you've worked in more places over someone who is just coming out of school. So that might be clear enough to say it will be dicey. If you were an employer, I'm pretty sure that you are going to employ someone with higher years of experience over someone who has little or no experience, right? Having said that, I understand that it's sometimes a challenge for recent graduates when they get out of school and they're trying to get a job, and people are not giving them a chance because there's no employment history. And here's what I always advise. That's the time for you to focus on volunteering jobs and getting internship opportunities. At that point, you might not want to focus so much on making money, getting that huge pay. You just want to focus on learning. So for the first 2 years, when you leave the university or when you leave campus, you want to focus on actually building your skills. So you want to take some professional courses, you want to take some volunteering opportunities, you want to take some internship opportunities, even though they might not pay you as high as you're expecting, right? So those are some of the things that you want to highlight in your CV or in your resume, right? When people see that, sometimes you might even go as far as telling people that you are okay to work for free. I know that it sounds absurd to say work for free, but the truth is every employer wants to maximize profit and minimize cost, right? And you know that training cost is a big deal. It's a cost that employers don't want to incur at this stage, right? So you want to make sure that your employer is not having to spend so much on training cost. So employers would automatically just go for someone who already has the experience, who they don't have to spend so much money to train or to teach, and who gets the job done almost immediately. So what you want to do is to make sure that you have learned, a lot of these skills, volunteer, success. I know it sounds absurd, like work for free, but to be very honest with you, we're really in a difficult space, right? Because like I said, employers would go for people who have the experience over the person who does not have the experience. It's if you had a company, it would be the same thing, because there's a training cost that you can pass by. So what you want to do is volunteer as much as you want to. There are still some organizations who will give you stipends, right? Maybe transportation stipends, or just, something little, to get you by. But here is what I always tell recent graduates. The knowledge that you are getting in the first 2 years will do you a long way. Like, it would go a long way for you. It would do you so much good. That was how I started as a human resource manager. I started from volunteering, internships, even when the pay was not so fantastic or attractive. And I learned a whole lot. And I'm at a stage in my life where I'm earning some kind of money that a few years ago I couldn't even think about. And so that's what happens when people see that you are able to gather experience. Then they can start to give you some opportunities. But like I said, nobody is really going to give opportunity without that experience. But one thing is, nobody is going to reject a volunteering opportunity, right? So you go ahead, ask to volunteer, ask for internship opportunities so that you can gain the experience that you need, for those kind of jobs that you're looking for.
Thank you very much. This is the last question I can see in the chat. It's from Desmond, and he's asking, at what stage of his startup should he think of getting someone for the hiring manager, the human resource manager? Does every startup need someone to be heading the human resource position? So that's from Desmond.
Very good question. This is actually depending on the organization. I know companies who don't have in-house HR. So as a startup, depending on the capacity and your resources, if you're able to hire an in-house HR manager, by all means. But if you can't, you want to outsource your human resource operations to maybe another HR manager or HR companies. So you don't necessarily need to have an in-house HR. If you don't have the financial capacity to have one, you can also outsource your HR positions, right? So it depends on what works for you, and also depending on your staff strength. If you're having a staff strength of, say, maybe 5 to 7 people, you might not really need an in-house HR. That is someone who earns on a monthly basis. You might just outsource the functions to maybe an external person who you pay per project or per assignment or per task. But if you have a staff strength of about, you're going to 20, 50 people, you should really consider having in-house human resource manager. So depending on your financial capacity, on your staff strength, it would determine whether you need to have in-house human resource manager or not. I know startup organizations who are really at a phase where they are recruiting in mass. For an organization like that, they've decided to have in-house manager who will help in the recruitment process. So depending on what works for you as an employer, so it's not usually cast in stone. It's what works for you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I just want to say that I'm also an attendee and a moderator as well, and I have my own personal questions. Okay, I want to know, you mentioned individual and group interview. Just a quick one, which do you feel is more effective? And this employee-employer expectation contract, can it be modified along the way during the course of working? Is there an opportunity to modify it?
Very good question. So the first question, individual interviews, group interviews, they both have their pros and their cons. Individual interviews are good in the sense that you get to interact directly with the candidates. You can't miss any detail. They're answering questions. You can detect their body language, their behaviors. Nothing passes you by. But the cons of that is that it can also make the candidate feel very uncomfortable, right? It could look like there's so much pressure on me right now. Now, for the group interview, the pros with that is if you have a large number of candidates to interview, you want to subject them to maybe a group assessment. I've been part of a group interview whereby everybody has the same question and you get to present for maybe 2 minutes each, right? So everybody is subject to equal assessment. It allows you to go through the process very quickly. But the problem with that is that you can miss important details. You can miss body language. You can miss, nonverbal expressions, right? So they both have their pros and their cons. So I would say, depending on the number of people that you have, and also depending on the role. If you're hiring for a senior management position, I will not advise you to do a group interview because that's a very critical role. Hiring for a leadership role or a senior management role is a critical role. So I would advise you to go for the individual where you are having great conversations. You want to understand what this person's idea and perspective is on leadership. But if you're hiring for maybe a role that doesn't require so much specialization, like maybe a customer rep role, a sales role, maybe the support staff in the organization, you can do a group interview if there are some things that you don't mind looking past by. So it's depending on the roles that you're recruiting for.
Okay.
I hope I answered your question.
Oh, very well, you did. Thank you so much. Oh, I can see we have just 6 minutes to go before we close this webinar. And I don't know if there are more questions that we can see.
I think there's a question from Esquan. I think it's Desmond. He says, can I start my can I start my startup by using only interns? How sustainable is this approach since it is more cost effective? That is a brilliant question. But sometimes it's dicey to answer. If you're starting an organization, the question is, what is your vision? What are you looking to achieve? If you hire only interns, you remember that it means that you don't have any, what's the word now? Any senior person on your team. Interns don't have so much experience, and that's why they're interns. So are you willing to take the risk of training, supervising, hand-holding, because that's what interns need. You need to do a lot of hand-holding, a lot of training, a lot of supervision. But if you're starting up an organization and you are looking to delegate some roles, you don't have so much time to train, you don't have so much time. Maybe, for example, you want to focus on pulling investments for your startup. It might not exactly be a great idea for you to have interns. Even if you're going to have interns, you still need at least one or two highly experienced people on your team who can provide a direction to the interns. So you need to weigh the pros and the cons. If you have the time to go through training, and remember, interns are not highly, that's why they are interns. They are also here to learn. So if you don't mind, interns taking the first few years of your business as a learning ground, if that works for you, please go ahead. But if you know it doesn't work for you, I have at least 2 or 3 highly experienced people on your team, then you can support with interns. It might be more cost effective. You might think it is cost effective at the beginning, but when you start to accumulate your training cost, your supervision cost, the time, the resources, and the energy you spend in hand-holding, it might almost be the same thing or even more if you have experienced people on your team. Yeah.
Thank you so much. In equal very words, I'll say super. That's so super, really. And I'm sure everyone really enjoyed this webinar. We are very, very grateful, Oluwatoyin. We are really honored to have you with us today. Definitely the recording will be available and it will still be uploaded on our YouTube channel. And if you need the notes, I'm sure Oluwatoyin will be very glad to share with every one of us here. So thank you so much, Oluwatoyin. Thank you, everyone. You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for making this very interactive. Thank you for bringing the questions and keeping them coming. Thank you for the appreciation. From the start of the webinar, I kept seeing a lot of appreciation, and I'm sure Oluwatoyin saw it as well, and she's glad to be here. You can all connect to her on LinkedIn as well. I've seen her LinkedIn profile, it's really blazing, and you can do that also. All right. So I think, do you have any last words, Oluwatoyin?
I just want to say thank you, for always having me here. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And, as hiring managers, one last thing to say, or one of the so many last things that I will eventually get to say later on is, we are so privileged, to be in a position of being the ones to bring people into the organization. So look at your job beyond just bringing in people to the organization, but you are also developing people, right? And that's why sometimes I like to say I'm a people development partner. Beyond just hiring, you are also there to help people to identify their strengths, identify the areas where they can really bloom and flourish. So make sure that you are not so focused on, a lot of hiring and firing that you forget that the employees also need you to help them to grow and develop in the organization. Thank you so much. And that will be my last word.
Thank you. And with this, we have come to the end of today's webinar. Bye, everyone.